Forbidden reels, locked film cans, and whispers in projection booths are the movies that Hollywood tried to hide from the world. Long before streaming and social media, a film could disappear overnight if it was deemed too dangerous for audiences. Revealing scenes, violence, politics, and taboo desires pushed these movies beyond the comfort of polite society, leaving censors scrambling and moral guardians outraged. Some of these films were banned for shocking scenes that tested the limits of morality. These weren't just movies, they were cultural earthquakes, shaking the foundations of Hollywood's carefully crafted image. They challenged the idea of what stories could be told, what bodies could be shown, and how far filmmakers were willing to go in pursuit of art and truth. Here are 19 vintage movies that Hollywood banned after going too far. Freaks, 1932. Freaks is one of the most infamous films in classic Hollywood history, a movie that shocked audiences and destroyed its director's career. Directed by Todd Browning, it told the story of life inside a traveling circus, featuring real sideshow performers with physical differences, conjoined twins, the human torso, and other performers often labeled as freaks. The plot followed the betrayal of a kind-hearted little person, Hans, by a beautiful trapeze artist who planned to marry him for his inheritance. When she and her strongman lover try to harm Hans, the circus troupe exacts a chilling revenge. What made Freaks so controversial was its unflinching portrayal of the sideshow performers. Instead of hiding their appearances, Browning showcased their lives and personalities, forcing audiences to confront their own prejudice. Upon its release, audiences were horrified. Reports claimed that people fainted in theaters, and MGM quickly cut over 30 minutes from the original film. Many cities banned it outright, and the United Kingdom refused to release it for over 30 years. Though it ruined Browning's career, Freaks later became a cult classic, praised for its empathy toward the outcasts and its daring break from Hollywood's polished image. Its story is both terrifying and tragic, a reminder of how fear and cruelty often hide behind the word normal. Today, Freaks is celebrated as a bold piece of early horror history. Babyface, 1933. Babyface is one of the most daring films to come out of early Hollywood, a story that shocked audiences and rattled the moral guardians of the 1930s. Starring Barbara Stanwyck as Lily Powers, the film follows a young woman who grows up in a rough, abusive environment, learning early that men will take what they want and that she can take what she wants too. Tired of being used and mistreated, Lily decides to use her beauty and charm to climb the social and financial ladder of New York City. The film's most infamous sequence shows Lily literally moving up floor by floor in a skyscraper, seducing her way from one man to another, each encounter pushing her higher in life. For a society still clinging to the moral restraints of the Great Depression, this was scandalous. Censors were outraged. Religious groups called the movie immoral, claiming it encouraged women to abandon virtue for pleasure and gain. Babyface was banned in several cities and labeled a threat to American values. Over time, the film gained recognition as a bold, pre-code masterpiece that reflected the desperation and resilience of women in a harsh world. Today, it is remembered as a symbol of early Hollywood's rebellious streak, and Barbara Stanwyck's fearless performance remains iconic. Ecstasy, 1933. Ecstasy is one of the most notorious films of the early 1930s, a European production that shook Hollywood and the world with its boldness. Starring a young Hedy Lamarr, the film told the story of a lonely woman trapped in a loveless marriage, who finds passion and freedom in the arms of another man. While the storyline itself was simple, what made Ecstasy infamous was its open depiction of female unclothed body and adult pleasure, things that Hollywood's moral codes simply did not allow. The film features a scene where Lamarr's character runs joyfully through a meadow after skinny dipping, her bare body briefly visible on screen. Even more scandalous was a sequence implying that she experiences intimate pleasure, a subject completely forbidden at the time. Religious organizations and censors across the globe were outraged. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned the movie, and the United States banned it for years. Despite the initial backlash, the film later became a piece of cinema history, remembered for its daring exploration of female desire in an era of repression. Today, Ecstasy is less shocking, but still powerful. A reminder that early filmmakers were willing to challenge the boundaries of morality long before Hollywood was ready to face such realities. The Outlaw, 1943. The Outlaw is one of the most talked about scandal films of the 1940s, not because of its story, but because of the way it flaunted adult themes in a conservative era. Directed and produced by billionaire and Hollywood rebel Howard Hughes, the film told a loose story about the outlaw Billy the Kid, played by Jack Butel, but audiences and censors barely noticed the plot. All eyes were on Jane Russell, the film's breakout star, whose sultry presence and famous cleavage became the centerpiece of the marketing campaign. Critics and religious leaders accused the movie of being indecent and purely with forbidden desire, with some cities banning it entirely. The film was less about gunslingers and more about testing Hollywood's boundaries. The controversy delayed its official release for years. Hughes fought with the Production Code Administration, refusing to tone down Russell's image, and he ultimately leveraged the scandal to make the movie a box office success. Audiences, curious about the film that censors tried to suppress, flocked to see it. Today, The Outlaw is remembered less for its Western tale and more as a landmark in Hollywood's battle with censorship. The film proved that sometimes controversy could sell a movie better than the story itself. Island of Lost Souls, 1932. Island of Lost Souls is a haunting piece of early horror cinema that terrified audiences and pushed censorship to its limits. Based on H.G. Wells's The Island of Dr. Moreau, the film tells the story of a shipwrecked man who stumbles upon a remote island ruled by the sinister Dr. Moreau, played chillingly by Charles Laughton. There, Moreau performs horrific experiments, turning animals into human-like creatures he calls his children. The film's dark atmosphere and disturbing implications made it a nightmare for 1930s viewers. Even more controversial was the subtle hint of unnatural obsession in Moreau's attempt to pair a human man with his most beautiful creation, the panther woman Lota. For a society already fearful of moral corruption in cinema, this was unthinkable. The British Board of Film Censors banned Island of Lost Souls outright for decades. Several U.S. states also banned or heavily edited the film. Religious groups condemned it as an attack on the sanctity of humanity, fearing its shocking imagery would disturb the public. Over time, the film was rediscovered and praised as a bold, atmospheric classic that explored humanity's darker instincts. Island of Lost Souls remains a chilling reminder of how early cinema dared to disturb and how society wasn't always ready to face those fears. Scarface, 1932. Scarface is one of the most infamous gangster films of early Hollywood, a movie that both thrilled audiences and terrified censors. Directed by Howard Hawks and produced by Howard Hughes, it told the violent rise and fall story of Tony Camonte, a ruthless bootlegger modeled after real-life gangster Al Capone. In the middle of America's Prohibition era, the film didn't just depict crime, it reveled in it, showing machine gun massacres, street wars, and an unapologetic portrait of organized crime. For audiences of the 1930s, Scarface was electric but frighteningly real. Censorship battles raged across the country. Local boards banned the movie outright, demanding cuts that added more punishment and moral lessons. Hughes and Hawks resisted, fighting for years before a toned-down version was finally released. Even then, Scarface faced bans in several U.S. cities and earned a scandalous reputation. Today, Scarface is recognized as a groundbreaking classic that helped define the gangster genre. Its raw energy and daring realism set the stage for future crime films, including its legendary 1983 remake. The Blue Angel, 1930. The Blue Angel is a landmark film in world cinema and one of the earliest movies to provoke major censorship battles. Directed by Joseph von Sternberg, it introduced the world to Marlene Dietrich in her breakout role as Lola Lola, a sultry nightclub singer whose charm and passionate undertones unravel the life of a respected professor, played by Emil Jannings. The film's story was simple yet devastating. A rigid, conservative teacher becomes infatuated with the carefree Lola, abandoning his dignity and career as he spirals into obsession. By the tragic end, he is a broken man, humiliated in public while the woman who captivated him goes on singing. For 1930 audiences, especially in conservative America, this narrative was scandalous. When the film reached the United States, moral watchdogs were horrified. Religious groups condemned it, and some cities banned or heavily censored it. Over time, The Blue Angel became a classic, remembered for its smoky cabaret atmosphere, and Dietrich's unforgettable performance of Falling in Love Again. What was once condemned as corrupting now stands as a masterpiece that captured the dangers of obsession and the irresistible pull of desire in cinema's early days. M. 1931. M. 1931 is one of the most chilling and influential films of early cinema, a psychological thriller that disturbed audiences and drew censorship for its daring subject matter. Directed by Fritz Lang in Germany, the film follows the terrifying story of a child murderer, played by Peter Lorre in his breakout role. As the city panics over a string of child eliminations, both the police and the criminal underworld launch a relentless manhunt, turning the film into a tense portrait of fear and paranoia. What made M so controversial was its willingness to explore the mind of a predator and the moral complexities surrounding justice. For 1930s audiences, the very idea of focusing a movie on someone who eliminates children was almost unthinkable. Unlike other crime films of the time, M forced viewers to confront evil up close, without glamour or easy escape. The film faced bans and delays in several countries, including the United States. Critics accused it of being too realistic and psychologically unsettling for audiences unprepared for such darkness. Today, M is celebrated as a masterpiece of early sound cinema and one of the first true psychological thrillers. What once seemed too dangerous and shocking for theaters is now recognized as a bold, groundbreaking work that explored humanity's darkest fears without flinching. The Virgin Spring, 1960. The Virgin Spring, 1960 is a haunting and controversial film by Swedish director Ingmar Bergman, a story that challenged moral boundaries and shocked audiences around the world. Set in medieval Sweden, it follows the tragic journey of a sheltered young girl who is sent to deliver candles to a church. Along the way, she is assaulted and eliminated by traveling strangers. When the assaulters unknowingly seek shelter in her family's home, her grieving father exacts a brutal and bloody revenge. What made The Virgin Spring so disturbing was its raw, unflinching depiction of adult-themed violence and vengeance in a time when cinema still avoided such harsh realities. The assault scene was particularly controversial, as it forced audiences to confront the vulnerability and cruelty of human nature. Critics and religious groups called the film repulsive and immoral, accusing it of exploiting suffering for art. Some countries banned it outright, while others demanded heavy cuts before it could be shown. Despite the backlash, the film's artistic power was undeniable. Its stark black and white cinematography, emotional intensity, and moral complexity earned it international acclaim, including the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. Today, The Virgin Spring is seen as a masterpiece of world cinema and an early example of how films could explore trauma, justice, and faith without compromise. Reefer Madness, 1936. Reefer Madness, 1936, is one of the most infamous propaganda films in Hollywood history, a cautionary tale that went so far in its warnings about banned substances that it ended up banned for the very hysteria it created. Originally produced under the title Tell Your Children, the movie was meant to scare parents and teenagers about the dangers of smoking these banned substances. The film follows a group of clean-cut high school students whose lives spiral into chaos after trying some banned substances. In exaggerated and often absurd sequences, the teens descend into a world of wild dancing, reckless behavior, hallucinations, and violent crime. Audiences of the 1930s found the film unintentionally shocking and ridiculous. Instead of serving as a sober warning, religious groups pushed for bans, and some cities refused to show it, calling it dangerous and corrupting. Decades later, Reefer Madness was rediscovered as a cult classic, embraced for its campy, unintentional comedy rather than its moral lesson. What was once considered too alarming for public viewing is now celebrated as a piece of cinematic history that reflects the fear and exaggeration of its era. Its legacy proves that sometimes, in trying to scare audiences, Hollywood went so far it became unforgettable. And God Created Woman, 1956. And God Created Woman, 1956, is the film that transformed Brigitte Bardot into an international icon and ignited moral panic across the globe. Directed by Roger Vadim, the French drama tells the story of Juliette, a free-spirited young woman in a small seaside town whose beauty and passionate undertones captivate every man around her. She refuses to be tamed by society's expectations, living by her own desires and challenging the conservative values of the 1950s. What shocked audiences most was Bardot's bold allure. Unlike typical Hollywood heroines, Juliette did not apologize for her desires or suffer punishment for her independence. For conservative audiences, particularly in America, this felt like a direct threat to traditional morality. The film faced immediate backlash. Religious organizations condemned it, the Catholic Legion of Decency labeled it condemned, and some U.S. states banned or censored it heavily. Ironically, the controversy only fueled its success, as curious audiences flocked to see the forbidden film that challenged society's idea of female virtue. Today, And God Created Woman is remembered as a turning point in cinematic history, one that introduced a new era of adult themes, freedom on screen. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988, may have arrived decades after the golden age of Hollywood, but its controversy was deeply rooted in the vintage band culture that shaped early cinema. Directed by Martin Scorsese and based on the novel by Nikos Kazantzakis, the film presented a bold, humanized portrayal of Jesus Christ, one that explored doubt, fear, and temptation in ways traditional religious films never dared. The film's most infamous moment is a dream sequence where Jesus imagines living a human life, marrying Mary Magdalene, having a family, and experiencing earthly love. For devout audiences, this was religiously shocking. Religious organizations, echoing the censorship movements of the 1930s and 1940s, erupted in protest. Some churches called for boycotts, cities banned local screenings, and international markets refused to show the film altogether. In France, theaters were even attacked by protesters. The backlash recalled the early days of Hollywood, when movies that challenged religion were swiftly banned to protect public morality. Though the United States no longer enforced the Hays Code, the moral uproar surrounding The Last Temptation of Christ proved that certain taboos never disappeared. Despite the fury, the film gained critical acclaim for its artistry and emotional depth, reminding audiences that cinema's role is to explore, provoke, and question. Today, it is remembered as a courageous work that tested the boundaries of faith in film, carrying the rebellious spirit of the vintage band movies into the modern era. Tarzan and His Mate, 1934. Tarzan and His Mate, 1934, is one of the most controversial entries in the classic Tarzan series, remembered less for its jungle adventure and more for the daring scene that nearly defined pre-code Hollywood. Starring Johnny Weissmuller as Tarzan and Maureen O'Sullivan as Jane, the film continued the love story of the iconic jungle couple. But this time, it went boldly where family-friendly cinema wasn't supposed to. The most infamous sequence was an underwater swimming scene in which Jane appears completely bare, gracefully diving and gliding alongside Tarzan. Though a body double performed the scene, the brief display of bare moment shocked 1930s audiences. For the newly enforced Hays Code, which aimed to keep Hollywood moral, this was a blatant violation. The backlash was swift. Religious and conservative groups decried the film as indecent, and censors demanded the removal of the bare swimming scene for many U.S. showings. Internationally, some markets banned the film altogether. Even though the rest of the movie followed the usual jungle adventure formula, that single moment was enough to make it infamous. Over time, Tarzan and His Mate gained recognition as a landmark of pre-code Hollywood, showcasing how filmmakers experimented before strict censorship took over. Today, the restored version with the original underwater sequence is celebrated by film historians as both romantic and artistically bold. What was once considered a shocking display of immorality is now a reminder of Hollywood's ongoing dance with desire, freedom, and the limits of the screen. Peeping Tom, 1960. Peeping Tom, 1960, is one of the most chilling and misunderstood films of its era, a psychological horror that went so far it destroyed its director's career. Directed by Michael Powell, the film follows Mark Lewis, a shy cameraman who harbors a dark obsession. He films the women he eliminates, capturing their final moments of terror through the lens of his camera. What made Peeping Tom so disturbing was not just its violence, but its perspective. Powell forced audiences to see the world through the eliminator's eyes, making viewers complicit in his crimes. The movie explored voyeurism, trauma, and the human fascination with fear subjects far too intimate and unsettling for 1960s audiences. Critics called it sick, perverted, and repulsive. and newspapers attacked Powell personally for daring to expose the darker side of human nature. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Many theaters pulled the film after only a week, and it was banned or restricted in multiple regions. Powell's reputation never recovered, and he spent years in professional exile. For decades, the film was treated as a stain on British cinema rather than a bold artistic statement. Today, Peeping Tom is hailed as a masterpiece of psychological horror, recognized for its influence on filmmakers like Alfred Hitchcock and its daring examination of fear and obsession. What was once considered unwatchable now stands as proof that some of the most important films in history are the ones that dared to look directly into the darkness. The Moon is Blue, 1953. The Moon is Blue, 1953, is a romantic comedy that shook Hollywood not with intimacy or violence, but with words. Directed by Otto Preminger, the film follows a lighthearted story of a young woman pursued by two charming bachelors. On the surface, it's a simple love triangle, but the dialogue pushed boundaries for its time by openly discussing dating, temptation, and intimacy without the usual moral punishment attached. The real scandal came from the film's language. Characters casually used words that the strict Hays Code of the 1950s considered unfit for the screen. There were no bare body scenes or explicit acts, but the idea of a woman speaking about attraction and romance with such honesty was enough to send moral watchdogs into outrage. The Production Code Administration refused to grant the movie its official seal of approval, effectively branding it immoral. Some U.S. cities banned it, while others required edits or refused screenings entirely. Religious groups warned that it would corrupt young audiences simply by treating adult relationships with humor instead of shame. Despite the uproar, The Moon is Blue became a box office success as curious viewers flocked to see the forbidden film. Over time, it was celebrated as a turning point in Hollywood's fight against outdated censorship, helping pave the way for more open discussions of romance and adult themes on screen. Today, it is remembered not for shocking visuals, but for the power of words to challenge an entire moral system. I Am Curious, Yellow, 1967. I Am Curious, Yellow, 1967, is one of the most controversial European films ever to clash with American censors, remembered for blurring the line between art, politics, and explicit adult themes. Directed by Vilgot Sjöman in Sweden, the film follows Lena, a curious young woman exploring life, love, and her country's social structure. Through a mix of documentary-style interviews, political commentary, and intimate scenes, the movie tackled topics like class struggle, nonconformity, and passionate liberation in a way no American film dared at the time. What made it notorious was its frank and unapologetic depiction of unclothed scenes and provocative activity, including scenes that U.S. authorities labeled as obscene. Unlike traditional love stories, the film treated adult themes as a natural, political, and personal experience, something that conservative audiences in the 1960s found shocking. Customs agents seized film reels, and U.S. prosecutors attempted to ban it under obscenity laws. The controversy sparked court battles that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. When the court ruled in favor of the film, it became a landmark case for freedom of expression in cinema, helping to dismantle the rigid censorship that had dominated Hollywood for decades. Today, I Am Curious, Yellow, is seen as a bold statement of the sexual revolution and the growing demand for artistic freedom in film. What was once banned as immoral is now studied as a key moment in the global fight against cinematic censorship and the rise of modern adult storytelling. Lolita, 1962. Lolita, 1962, is one of Hollywood's most infamous and morally challenging films. Directed by Stanley Kubrick and based on Vladimir Nabokov's controversial novel, it tells the story of Humbert Humbert, a middle-aged professor who becomes dangerously obsessed with 14-year-old Dolores Lolita Hayes, ultimately entering into a secret and deeply disturbing relationship with her. Even without explicit scenes, the very premise of adult desire toward a child was shocking for audiences of the early 1960s. Kubrick had to navigate the still powerful production code, which forbade direct depictions of such taboo subjects. Instead of showing anything overt, he relied on innuendo, suggestive dialogue, and visual symbolism to communicate Humbert's obsession. Sue Lyon, only 14 when cast, became an icon of forbidden desire with her heart-shaped sunglasses, forever tied to the film's scandalous reputation. Censorship battles were inevitable, The film was condemned by religious organizations, and several countries banned or delayed its release. Even in the United States, Lolita only passed censors after extensive edits and negotiations, sparking debates over whether art should be allowed to explore such dark corners of human behavior. Despite the outrage, Lolita became a critical success and remains a landmark in cinema history. Its legacy is one of discomfort and fascination, a film that forces viewers to confront the unsettling realities of obsession and manipulation. What was once seen as dangerously immoral is now remembered as a daring, thought-provoking piece of Hollywood's forbidden storytelling. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. A Clockwork Orange, 1971, is one of the most infamous films ever made, a dystopian masterpiece by Stanley Kubrick that pushed the limits of violence, morality, and censorship. Based on Anthony Burgess's novel, the story follows Alex DeLarge, a charming yet sadistic young man who leads a gang on a spree of ultraviolence, theft, and assault in a futuristic society. After being captured, Alex undergoes a government experiment to cure his criminal impulses, raising disturbing questions about free will and the nature of evil. What made the film so explosive was its unflinching combination of graphic violence and dark satire. Scenes of assault and elimination were paired with cheerful classical music, creating a disturbing contrast that unsettled audiences worldwide. Critics and moral guardians accused Kubrick of glorifying violence and corrupting youth, while some real-life crimes in the UK were allegedly inspired by the film's gang antics. A Clockwork Orange was banned in several countries, including Ireland and parts of the United States. In the UK, after receiving threats and seeing public outrage, Kubrick himself requested the film be withdrawn from British cinemas, and it remained unavailable there for nearly 3 decades. Today, A Clockwork Orange is hailed as a cinematic classic and a bold examination of morality, society, and control. What was once condemned as dangerously obscene is now studied for its artistry and psychological depth, proving that the most controversial films often leave the deepest cultural impact. The Devils, 1971. The Devils, 1971 is one of the most controversial films in cinema history, a provocative work by British director Ken Russell that combined religion, politics, and adult themes in a way that horrified censors and outraged audiences. Based on the real 17th century Loudoun possessions, the film tells the story of Father Urbain Grandier, a charismatic priest accused of mysterious beliefs after a group of nuns fall into fits of adult-themed hysteria. The film's shocking power came from its relentless depiction of religious controversy and harshness. Scenes of nuns writhing in obsessive attraction frenzy, public agony, and the destruction of a sacred church pushed moral boundaries far beyond what mainstream audiences were prepared to see. Critics accused the movie of being explicit and religiously offensive, while religious groups demanded it be banned entirely. Censorship was swift and severe. The film was heavily edited for release, with many countries including the UK and the US cutting or banning it. Even in its trimmed form, The Devils provoked outrage, and the uncut version remained nearly impossible to see for decades. The controversy ended Ken Russell's chances of making a mainstream Hollywood career, though it cemented his reputation as a fearless filmmaker. Today, The Devils remains one of cinema's most controversial banned films, a bold reminder of how stories challenging faith and morality can leave a lasting mark. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold Hollywood stories. Which banned film shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're listening. Until next time, remember, behind the glamour, Hollywood's wildest truths still echo.